As I mentioned earlier in the tease, like our next guest has been writing a lot about like the stuff off the field recently because there's so much going on. We'll get into some of that and obviously the stuff happening on the field here come September. Adam Rittenberg of ESPN joining us on TexAgs Radio. Adam, good morning, man. How you doing?
Doing well. How you doing?
Doing great. So the AP poll yesterday comes out. A&M comes in at 23. Did they get it right for A&M, a team that has the talent, hasn't shown it yet, but made some necessary changes?
Yeah, I think A&M fans should be thrilled that they're even in the poll, given what happened last year. But as you mentioned, certainly has the talent and certainly is more of a projection than I think necessarily a reflection of what we saw last year. Do they have the potential to be a top 25 team? Absolutely. Do they have the potential to be a top 15 team? Absolutely. But were they more deserving than, say, Texas Tech, that brings back a lot of players from pretty good team last year? I probably wouldn't have done that. They weren't in my power rankings. A&M was not. But I think overall, what you could expect at the top, certainly be interesting to see if Florida State, Washington, USC can kind of back up this preseason hype, or whether they're going to fall off a little bit.
Yeah, when it comes to A&M, did they at least, because depending on how people do their rankings, did they at least do enough to make you feel better about some of the questions with the offensive philosophy, potentially some of the youth movement getting a little bit older and more experienced?
I think they played better down the stretch last year. Certainly their final game was encouraging, and you're talking to coaches around the SEC. I think there's optimism around Connor Wegman and what he can do at quarterback. But I think until we see what this offense is and how it functions and how they how Jimbo Fisher and Bobby Petrino truly work together when things are adverse, I think it's hard to make any sort of proclamations of value right now. We have to wait and see with A&M. They have a fairly easy opening stretch. Can they take advantage of that, gain some confidence? But as you know, there's going to be moments where things don't go well for them, just like that's the case for every team. How do they respond in that moment? How do their players respond? But I think the real intrigue, at least away from College Station, is how do their coaches respond? And can they be positive in terms of getting things on track? Or, as several coaches have told me in the conference, it's just going to explode, and it'll be fun for the rest of us, but certainly not fun for A&M or its fans.
That's interesting that people are saying that. Did you see the Bobby Petrino press conference? Because I feel like, a press conference is what it is. It's a PR show, but he handled it, I thought, perfectly.
Yeah, he did. And again, Bobby's been around. He's been a head coach. I think there's a healthy amount of respect for sure between Bobby Petrino and Jimbo Fisher, but it doesn't matter, David, until the season begins, until you've lost the game, or, the calls were not right, or there was a disagreement in game. How are they going to handle that? You have two guys who have built their reputations on being elite play callers and not really being questioned. And that could certainly work to A&M's benefit, or it could work against the program. And we're not going to know. We're not going to know on August 10th or whenever Bobby's press conference was. We're going to know on September 10th and October 10th and November 10th. That's when it matters. That's when we're going to really see, and A&M fans are going to see how they respond in the moment and whether they can let this thing or correct whatever needs to be corrected, make sure the program doesn't spiral. And if you lose a game, get back on track. That's what I'm most intrigued about. But certainly, I think, from what Bobby said, and he's excited to be there, and he's been around. He knows what he needs to say, and I think he handled that situation well.
Adam Rittenberg with us here on TexAgs Radio. Adam, at the end of September, we'll know a lot about A&M. What will we know about Georgia, who already is the number one team? They've won 2 back-to-back national championships. What do you think we'll know about them?
Well, I think it'll be intriguing to see how they look on offense. We got so used to seeing Stetson Bennett. It's amazing to say that, but we're so used to seeing him lead that offense and play really well in big moments and complement what's been an incredible defense. Now there's going to be a new quarterback, most likely Carson Beck, leading that crew. How does he handle those situations? How is the receiving core around him? I think there's optimism that they might be better at receiver. They obviously have the best tight end in the country in Brock Bowers coming back. They've always been strong on the offensive line and at running back. And so I think that's the unit that I'm going to be watching, because, Todd Monken's gone. And even though Mike Bobo had that job for many years, he's still a new person calling the plays, more involved than he was last year as an analyst. Defensively, I think we've come to expect excellence from Georgia. So anything less than that, I think might raise a few alarm bells, especially given some of the offenses that they'll face later in the season.
Talking to Adam Rittenberg here on TexAgs Radio. All right, so same question, but let's pose it towards Alabama. What are we going to know about Alabama at the end of September?
Yeah, Alabama to me is a lot more intriguing because I know they've had situations at quarterback that are uncertain entering the year, but not one quite like this that I can remember, especially following a run of Heisman Trophy winner and Bryce Young and Tua Tagovailoa and Jalen Hurts. Who's going to be the quarterback? How is he going to play? How is it going to work with Tommy Rees and that system? It's really intriguing to me because we know they have the talent. Really on both sides of the ball, but do they have a difference maker at quarterback? You look at LSU, Jaden Daniels coming back. I think there's an expectation that Carson Beck is going to be really good for Georgia. Spencer Rattler's back, obviously, at South Carolina. I think there's high hopes for Joe Milton at Tennessee. And in Alabama, it's a giant question mark to see who's that guy and how's he going to perform, especially with the week 2 game against Texas, which is, the heavy favorite to win the Big 12, seemingly the most talented roster again in the Big 12, a team that pushed Alabama last year, and Alabama was fortunate to get out of Austin with the win. So that's a really good barometer to see where Alabama is very, very early in the season.
Adam, it's funny with Alabama. I would not be surprised if they go 11-1, regardless of the quarterback situation, because it's Alabama. I wouldn't be surprised, and it's not a huge drop-off, that they go 9-3, something I don't think Nick Saban's done.
Right. Yeah. I mean, it's been a long time since Alabama has certainly lost 3 regular season games, but I think because of that uncertainty at quarterback, there's certainly questions along the offensive line. Can that unit get back to being elite again? How's their defensive front going to be? They obviously have some elite level players, I think, in the back 7, but do they have an elite lineman? How many of those incredible recruits are going to get on the field early in their careers? Who's going to replace Jahmyr Gibbs as far as multi-talented threat out of the backfield? So these are all valid questions. Now, it's a program that has shown over a long period of time that it rarely goes very long without winning a national championship. You have the greatest coach, I believe, of all time who's leading the program. So I think it's 9-11-1 is a lot closer to than 9-3, but I think both are certainly possible given the question marks around the team entering the season.
Adam, let's turn our attention to the Big Ten, Ohio State. There's still some questions about the quarterback situation there with Kyle McCord, and I think Devin Brown is the one who's slightly under him. How does that play out, and how does it play out this year for Ryan Day?
Right. As we sit here mid-August, they don't have a starter, and I think there was certainly hope that someone would separate himself. In talking to people around the Ohio State program, I was there about 10 days ago. They say that Devin Brown is not the type of guy to go down without a fight. Even though Kyle McCord's been in the program longer, he's been seen as sort of that next guy in after CJ Stroud. Devin Brown's a tremendous athlete. He's a great competitor. He brings something a little bit different to the table. When I was there, and I think they're still doing this, they are actually practicing on 2 separate fields to essentially give a lot of reps to both of those 2, but also the other quarterbacks, in that room. So I think that Ryan Day, and hearing him a little bit earlier this week, could sense a little frustration that they haven't had, necessarily that separation. Maybe that'll occur in the next week. Maybe it spills into the season. And as Michigan showed last year, you can play a couple of quarterbacks early on, figure things out, and still go on to win a conference and play for in the college football playoff. But you look at that week, 4 game for Ohio State at Notre Dame. That's the point where they need to have it figured out. Who's our guy? Who are we going to ride with? Whether it's Brown, whether it's McCord, as many think it will be, they need to have an answer by then.
Adam, let's talk about the Florida State situation. Obviously, they are looking for ways out. Today's the 15th. I think it's the deadline for them to be able to tell the ACC, regardless, there's the grant of rights. It's not that easy. They have lawyers involved. Has anything happened today that you know of? And secondly, does something happen over the next couple of years?
Well, I think nothing has happened today so far. I don't expect it to. They haven't scheduled a Board of Regents meeting at this hour, and I think they would have to be able to facilitate an early exit out of the ACC. So I think they're looking at their options, seeing what's possible. They've obviously sounded their alarms and made it very clear to the ACC the position that they have right now. And we'll see what type of response the league will have, or if there's no response. I think Florida State has certainly rallied its base, but then you've got to act. And this is a program, and you guys know this as well as anyone, given your head coach, that has not been flush with money. Despite its incredible history, Florida State is not a program that's dripping in money, or else Jimbo Fisher might still be their head coach and wouldn't have left for Texas A&M. He would have stayed where he won a national championship. So the fact that they're the one who's so motivated to challenge the ACC and get out of a situation that's not going to be cheap is really interesting. And we'll see if how it kind of evolves here over the next few months and possibly years.
What about Stanford, their football future? There are some that think maybe they just decide not to do it, which is so sad to hear, especially the success that they had in the 2010s to the 2020. What is going to happen with Stanford?
Yeah, it'll be interesting. I don't think Stanford's going to fold the program. They have a lot of money, and they have a history, as you mentioned, of competing at a high level. They did that for many years under Jim Harbaugh and David Shaw, and even going back to the Bill Walsh and Denny Green and others over the years. They've had a solid program. They're just looking for a home. Whether that's partnering up with the AAC schools or the ACC schools, or trying to figure it out with the 3 remaining Pac-12 schools. I think, again, the day and age we're in right now, David, with NIL, the portal, those things don't work in Stanford's favor. So I think reality has to set in as far as what can you compete for. It's going to be a lot harder to have a top 10 program like you had towards the end of Harbaugh's tenure, and certainly the first part of David Shaw's tenure. That's probably not realistic, but I don't think you have to fold the program either. So it's figuring out where you belong, what you can compete for, and what's adequate, but also where your other sports program is going to be, because in many ways, Stanford's athletic program is much stronger than its football program. When you look at the overall diversity of sports and, really name a sport, and they're usually good at it. Name a sport, they're usually producing professionals or Olympians or both. And so that's, I think, the maybe the primary concern for Bernard Muir, their AD, and the administration at Stanford.
Adam, I know you've been reporting on the messy situation at Northwestern. Football took the headlines initially, but I think it was just yesterday the baseball side getting a little bit more messy. What's the latest with that?
Right. Yeah, there's a lot of different things happening there with different programs. Now, they're not all the same. Football was a strictly a hazing issue with allegations from former players in the program, mainly against other players, which have not been named. Baseball is an issue involving the former coach Jim Foster, and now staff members have filed a lawsuit against him, against the athletic director, against the university. There's also been a lawsuit filed on the volleyball side, but that was an incident that happened a couple of years ago. So it's all because, in my view, the football situation with Pat Fitzgerald and the attention that generated in early July. That's kind of opened the floodgates for a lot of these other legal actions to be taken. And each one will be looked at differently. Northwestern pushed back much more against the baseball lawsuit than it did any of the lawsuits from former football players. But there's certainly questions going forward as to the leadership, who will be leading this program, who will be leading the university. I think there's a lot of people around Northwestern who have been silent, but absolutely would like to see changes made beyond just Pat Fitzgerald losing his job.
Adam, let's close with one actual on-the-field thing. The current crop of quarterbacks in college football, the returners, the guys that are expected to lead the way, the Caleb Williams, the Drake May, just how good of a future do those guys have, in your opinion, at the next level?
Yeah, it's really exciting because you think about, the NFL draft, 3 of the top 4 picks were quarterbacks, including the top 2. You think maybe there'd be a drop-off. Well, there isn't. And certainly Caleb Williams and Drake May from North Carolina are the headliners, but there's other players that, with strong performances this season, will improve their draft stock. The Pac-12, for example, we'll have a story about this out soon on ESPN.com. It may be the most productive returning group of quarterbacks in a single league ever in college football. When you think about Williams, Michael Penix, who led the nation in passing last year, Bo Nix, Cam Rising, who led Utah to back-to-back Pac-12 championships, DJ Uiagalelei now transferring in to Oregon State, Jaden DeLora, Cam Ward. There's a lot of really productive players coming back in the Pac-12. ACC's got a really interesting quarterback group. Last year, they were the league we were all talking about at quarterback, but you have Drake May and Jordan Travis, kind of as the headliners, but Brennan Armstrong, who was a record-setting quarterback at Virginia, he's reuniting with his former offensive coordinator at NC State, Robert Anae, now at NC State. Jack Plummer is in the league, transferring to reunite with Jeff Brom in Brom's first year at Louisville. Phil Jurkovich, who was started at Notre Dame, then went to Boston College. Now he's at Pitt with his former offensive coordinator in Frank Signetti. So, and then Clemson with Cade Klubnik, can they recapture their form offensively? That's going to be really interesting. Big Ten, SEC, not as many familiar names, but we went through some of them in the SEC. Certainly Jaden Daniels up at the top of that list, along with Spencer Rattler from South Carolina. So I think it's a really exciting group of quarterbacks, but I think everyone, as far as NFL stock goes, is chasing Williams in May.
Does KJ Jefferson have a chance at the next level?
Yes. Yeah, I'm glad you brought him up. I think he's an interesting player. Certainly will be in a new offense this year with Dan Enos, who's on his second stint as the Arkansas offensive coordinator. But he's a guy that has shown really good efficiency, doesn't turn the ball over a lot. He's obviously a really big dude, hard to bring down from a running standpoint. So interested to see what he can do to elevate his team and his stock for the draft, as a third-year starter now with a second coordinator in Enos.
Adam, I appreciate it, man. Thanks so much. We'll do it again, all right?
You bet. Thanks for having me on.